Depending on how we view it, this could be seen either as the final panel session or the penultimate session before the concluding session. Whichever way we look at it, I think this is a very important session because of the colorful lineup of scholars who have been involved in looking at the problem of decolonization of knowledge or its related concept of multi-diversity for a long time. And they will be addressing many of the core issues which have already been raised over the last 2-3 days. And in that sense, this is going to be a very important session. On another note, I think all of us kept hearing in the last session that they were 17 minutes late. But if you look at the time right now, for being 17 minutes late, they were compensated by almost 1 hour. It went on. In Japan, I'm sure many of you are familiar with this or have heard this. If a train runs more than 10 minutes late, the station master and all the senior staff will line up to apologize to the passengers for the breach of contract. They are supposed to, but I think in our case, and this is where context is very important, in our case, I think you were rewarded for being late, in the sense that because you ran, 17 minutes late or so, you had more time for discussion. You had more time, I think, to enjoy and to reflect on the views of the speakers as well as the other participants. I'm not going to stand up to apologize on behalf of anybody because the context is different. Here, it's a good thing that the organizers were generous with time. We are fortunate to have 4 key papers and a commentator who will be responding to the presentations. And as I said, these 4 presentations represent an effort to look into specific situations which focus essentially on the university. So there is a kind of difference if you look at the earlier sessions and this session. And perhaps for that reason, it's a befitting final panel, because our focus, the theme of the conference, is decolonizing our universities. So at the end of the day, although we had the liberty to venture into all kinds of other related issues, we have to fall back on the main purpose of this assembly. I am tempted to offer my own reflections on the theme of the conference, but I shall refrain from that in view of the limitations of time. And we are also doubly fortunate because all the speakers have agreed to make their presentation, which are already, in a sense, made available to all of you in the conference package, within a time frame of about 15 minutes. And then we'll go on to the commentary and open the session for discussion. The first speaker is Yusuf Progler, someone who has been associated with the multiversity project for quite some time. One of the initiators, and therefore somebody who is well informed in the development and the history of this initiative to bring about a rethinking, reframing of the priorities of our universities. Actually, his biodata, very impressive biodata, is also available in the conference package. You can have a look at that. But I just would like to highlight one of or 2 points, apart from the earlier suggestion that he has been one of the original members of the initiative. At present, Professor Progler teaches at a university in Japan, the Asia Pacific Mekong University. And the university itself is a model of an attempt to bring about a new way of looking at higher education, especially university education in Japan, because this is a university which accommodates both languages, English as well as Japanese, and which has almost the same number in terms of composition of Japanese and non-Japanese, allowing for some experimentation to take place. How would a truly international community relate to each other in a university setting compared to perhaps the 1,000 or so other universities in Japan, which tend to be wholly Japanese in outlook, orientation, and direction. Without further ado, I would like to invite Professor Progler. By the way, all the speakers will be making their presentations from here. They have chosen to do it from here rather than to walk up to the rostrum.
Thanks very much for the introduction. I'd like to mention 3 points in the limited time that I have here. One of them is a reflection on a personal question that several people have asked me here that I think is relevant to this meeting. The second point is I want to reflect on the idea of multiversity within the context of institutional changes that are happening in universities around the world. And then third, I would like to mention an initiative that we began last year that we entitled Multiversity Media, and outline that briefly and invite you to participate in that. The question that people asked in various ways of me here, well, let me repeat one of those questions. Someone said, how do you feel as an American about all this West bashing, American bashing, and how did you get involved in such a thing? Well, I thought about that actually, and I think that that type of where we come from question is important for me to reflect on, but also for all of us to think about. When I was a university student, I was in university primarily for the reason that many students come to university. today, many. That is to find a job and for lack of nothing better to do. But I didn't have any burning desire to study. It was just those two reasons. I think if we really are reflecting, we'll find that many of our students are like that. But something happened to me in that university experience, and that ignited my mind and led to 10 years of writing, really an impact, and something ignited in me. That 10 years of writing is what led to the invitation from Claude and Idris to join this project in the early, about 10 years ago from now. So what happened to me in the university? And that, I want to talk briefly about John Mohawk, who was one of my professors. He's a member of the Haudenosaunee Nation, one of the indigenous groups of people that live in what's now called the United States and Canada. He was a professor at the university that I was at, along with Oren Lyons and Audrey Shenandoah, other members of indigenous peoples of Western New York and Southern Ontario. John did what we are saying needs to be done, many of the things. For example, he taught me an indigenous people's view of American history. And of course, it flew in the face of the official view of American history that is inculcated to school kids throughout their primary and secondary education. And that made a tremendous impact on me. And suddenly, I wanted to be there, not just for lack of something to do, not just to find a job, but it ignited my mind. The second point that he made is that before Europeans colonized the world, they colonized themselves. And that's a point that someone else brought up earlier in this conference as well. And that made a very big impact on me as well. And then also the way that he lived as a university professor was quite interesting to me. It didn't come through the normal training. One of the things that Ward Churchill mentions in the White Studies pamphlet that I edited is that we have to try to find ways to bring people into the academy that are not accredited according to the usual rules of the academy. And so he was among a number of native peoples that had other credentials, let's call them, besides the usual credentials that professors have, that they formulated this Native Studies program as part of what's called the American Studies program. John was an organic farmer. He lived on the reservation, and he had a very strong participation in local activities around organic farming, but he also was intensely involved in global work. This is the mid-90s when the internet was still quite young. Most people didn't even know what it was, but he was all over the internet, and he was among the people that helped the Zapatistas movement to counter the Mexican government. Of course, a lot of the organizing that brought global support for the Zapatistas movement in Chiapas was organized via the internet. And John was all over that. So he had a global dimension. He also was a dynamic speaker at many of the anti-globalization rallies that were being held around the U.S. at that time. And so he had a global dimension that involved internet and things of that sort, but he also was firmly rooted in a locale of some sort as an organic farmer. This being around this person ignited me from just another student shuffling through the halls of higher education into someone who became on fire, really, with ideas. And I spent the next 10 years writing anything that I could, and that is what led to the invitation to join this project. There's a sad end to that story, which is relevant to the next thing that I want to talk about here, and that is a couple of years after I graduated, the American Studies department was essentially decimated by the university. It consisted of Native American Studies, African American Studies, Puerto Rican Studies, Women's Studies, Working Class Studies, all as a kind of a coalition creating this Department of American Studies. It's not the Yale model, the patriotic Yale model of American Studies. This is the, let's call it the subaltern American Studies. But it was, the department was decimated by the new neoliberal ideology that had infected many of the administrators of the university. One of the inspiring forces behind that was the books of Martha Nussbaum and a number of other people that were raising questions that were raised earlier about relevance and accountability of university programs, and they started turning things over to the accountants rather than to the academics. And so it became a numbers game, and there was a wave of attempts, and many successful, to try to shut down various kinds of studies programs. CUNY suffered some of that as well in New York City. The American Studies faculty was unable to rise to that challenge. They either were unwilling to have that discussion, to defend on the same turf as the Martha Nussbaums of the world and the other people, or they were unwilling to mount a response or unable. But whatever happened, that department basically was decimated, and the faculty were spread among other, retreated back to ordinary disciplines. It can no longer grant PhDs, and it became seriously downsized. Well, this trend of the financial questions becoming part of what we have to face in university is only increased since then. But it isn't new. I mean, the name multiversity, in fact, there's an irony about our name. There are actually two multiversities, and I'd like to spend a few minutes reflecting on the two multiversities. The first time the term was used was by Clark Kerr, the president of University of California in the early 1960s, that proposed the idea in a book called The Uses of the University. He proposed the idea of multiversity as an institution that is accountable to society in various ways. Of course, the cryptic message behind him, as interpreted by many of the academics that seriously resisted that, was that the society to Clark Kerr meant corporations and other moneyed interests. But this question of who is the university is accountable to is an interesting question. And so I think we need to keep that in mind, not that it's accountable to corporations and the government and whatever as a kind of a clearinghouse for the needs of the powerful in the society. But there is a question of accountability and relevance that we can broaden beyond that original idea of the multiversity. Now, our idea of the multiversity, which arose about 10 years ago, is mainly is about curriculum, rebalancing the discrimination, the Eurocentrism, and it's also really about accountability to the past, to ourselves, to our communities. It's also about relevance. How is what we study relevant to us and the world? So, although, you know, I don't want to put those two together to say they're saying the same thing. They are, in many ways, from a different perspective, raising an important point here. And this has only gotten more acute with the ascendancy of the neoliberal ideology that is really now turning a lot of what happens in universities over to the accountants. Subsidies from governments are drying up the world over. I made it a point to talk to many of you here to see if it's happening in your places, and indeed they said yes. Universities are shifting from elite national institutions into more of a corporate model, a business model. There are serious implications for this. One of the implications is around the funding issues, is the question of one way to solve that is to downsize the university, raise the tuition, make the entrance requirements more stringent. People are protesting in the UK and other places for that. That would basically be turning it over to the rich and to those who are already predisposed towards intellectual endeavors. Unlike me, when I went into the university, I think I was probably part of a majority of students that were not part of either of those categories. Not the sons and daughters of the intellectuals, for example, not the sons and daughters of the rich, just somebody that sees the university as a way of upward mobility to get a job and something to do for lack of nothing better to do. Now, I think if we close out those students by following the one proposal to address this question is to downsize the university, make limitations, raise the tuition, we're doing, in my opinion, a serious injustice. But the other side of it is that there are financial issues that if they're not met, then the universities will close. As we mentioned in some of our papers, they'll go bankrupt. And the end result is the same, except instead of turning it over to the rich and intellectuals, we'll turn it over to nobody. So if we look at the opposite perspective, we could think about opening the doors of the university to everybody. That could solve the financial problem, but it would mean serious adjustments of our expectations of what we think we ought to be doing as university professors. The idea of training the next generation of ourselves, that is, of researchers, would not work in that model. We would have to think seriously about larger class sizes and things of that sort. Now, I'm not going to take sides on this. I just want to put that out there as a structural, institutional, administrative dynamic that is impacting many of us. It could be that the, let's call the research elite that would rather have a few highly motivated, intelligent, well-read students to teach could eventually collude with the accountants to lead to the closing or downsizing of significant numbers of universities the world over. That would leave us then with the question of what do we do with all of the, what I termed in an earlier lecture, the potential walking wounded, people that have spent their entire youth, really, in high school, looking towards the university and then finding that the door is being slammed shut in their face. By the way, something that's missing from all of our discussions here is that phenomenon of that really the university has colonized secondary and primary school. The main purposes of that type of schooling has been to get into universities, but it's only a small percentage that can get in many places, and of those, upon graduation, they don't get what they expect to get, which is a job or some position in society. So we have to think about these issues, but we might face the possibility that who we see as students now, let's call them learners, there might be many, 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 many more of those outside the academy than inside. And so I think we have to also play a role in that body of learners as well. And so there are two ways I can envision to do that. One is, of course, community, on the community level, on the local level. That maybe you don't need school, maybe you don't need university. If you have something that's vibrant in the community that students can walk into, then you wouldn't have to go to university to get a job. You wouldn't have to go to university for lack of nothing better to do. But that's something that there are myriad examples now of these local initiatives. So I'm not going to talk about that. I want to talk about the global side of this. And just briefly mention the Multiversity Media Project that we've been working on. The main idea here is to take advantage of the internet as a way to distribute our work and the work of others, to make that readily available to anyone who wants to learn any of the things that we have to say. The internet now has reached the stage where it really can, I think, be accessible to ever-increasing numbers of people. So we have to take steps. The internet is not something that's there, right? It's something that is made by people. And much of the internet now is incestuous, that is cutting and pasting from one site to another. And much of the internet is presentist, that is, it's current events and things that are happening now. But there's a whole another body of knowledge and information and experience that is not part of the incestuous and presentist internet that we have to participate in adding those things to the internet. Things don't get on the internet by themselves. So we have to open up file sharing sites, discussion forums, blogs, make servers available, internet television channels that can spread the kinds of things that we think are relevant and important to our message, so that whether somebody's inside a university or outside of a university, they have access to that knowledge. Printing books and journals is one thing, but it's very expensive to ship and carry these heavy things. We ought to be scanning, making PDFs of all of our books, all of our articles, and put those readily and freely available on the internet. Any documentary films and other creative works of digital media that we are involved in, we should put those up and make those readily and freely available to anyone who wants to watch them. And we can organize all of this through a series of discussion forums, web blogs, servers that would store this. And I outlined in great detail how that type of system might work in my earlier paper, which is also on the multi-world site. So I'm not going to go into the details of that. But just to mention before I finish that what has happened since we launched this last year, there are 3 channels on the internet. One is TVU Networks. We've got about 50,000 viewers on that, and about 400 programs that are airing in a rotation on that. That runs like a conventional television station. It's there, it runs according to a schedule. You turn it on, you watch what's on or not. Then there is a YouTube channel and a Vimeo channel. Those are more on demand. We put stuff on those channels, people click and they watch when they want to watch it. And those are 3 separate, different kinds of entities. We have to put all of our materials on those, but eventually we need to detach ourselves from those and set up our own servers, our own places to do this. But for now, we can use what's available. And on the YouTube channel, we've got about 150,000 viewers and about 200 videos on there. And on Vimeo, which is a newer one, there are about 3,000 or 4,000 viewers with about 40 videos. And so I invite you to read my paper from last year called Toward Multiversity Media that outlines all these details, and you ought to be visiting and giving some feedback on these. And we need other people who can participate in this, because you can't do it all with one person. What we really need is a core of technically savvy people that want to build this type of a network so that we can make our knowledge and our information available on a global scale. Thanks very much. Look forward to discussions later.
Thank you very much. The main thrust of Professor Progler's paper is that there is a need to develop pathways to make learning and knowledge available through other than university channels or sources. The next presentation is on a topic which kept coming up the last 2 days and which was even highlighted by the Deputy Minister of Education in his address when he talked about ranking. Dr. Campbell has been working on this issue of university ranking for quite some time, and at the moment I think he is with University Science Malaysia on a project to look into this issue very critically. And his topic is on today's university, mimicry or creativity. Please, Dr. Campbell.
Assalamu alaikum. Good morning, or should I say good afternoon. I think it's good afternoon. As introduced, my name is James Campbell. Firstly, I'd just like to thank the organisers at Citizens International and University Science for Malaysia for the invitation to speak here. It's quite a privilege and quite an honour to be among quite articulate colleagues, and to be quite frank with you, if this is still working, I feel quite dwarfed by many of you, so I'll put that up there right from the start. At any rate, to kind of give a flavour, I'm hoping that many of you may have read the paper because I have a limited amount of time. I'm going to have to rush through some of the basic points. To give an insight into what's behind it, I'm collaborating with my colleagues, and now I think I can call them my friends, at USM, in seeking to advance and articulate and help the agenda of USM in seeking to change the direction of higher education. USM has a program of transformation, and it's basically, it has a commitment to sustainability, and by that it's not simply environmental sustainability, but that sense of environmental sustainability includes cultural and social. It's a broad agenda. It includes a commitment to the poor, to what is referred to as the bottom billions, the disenfranchised, the marginalised. And it also includes a commitment to reinterrogating and advancing knowledge rather than simply accepting the current forms of knowledge that have been so ably critiqued by many others in this conference. I was posed a question or a problematic about, how does one square the factory model of a university or something like that with creativity? Yeah? And I sat there and I scratched my head of the little hair that's left on it, and I attempted for a while to think of ways that I could square the literally unsquareable. And I ended up concluding that I couldn't do it. And so then I thought to myself, well, what is one of the fundamental problems that we seem to be facing? What is one of the fundamental issues that is stymieing, if you will, creativity and the kinds of themes and interests that have come up in this conference? And it struck me that it was what in the sociological literature they refer to as isomorphic mimicry. In other words, the copying or the mimicking of institutions, and not just institutions, the people within them, of dominant modes that are privileged under the current so-called, and we use this as a kind of catch-all phrase, neoliberal globalisation. And I thought to myself that, and this is something I've argued in the media, in the New Straits Times. In fact, this paper is a kind of collation of several articles that I'd written for the New Straits Times. I thought to myself that one of the big problems in seeking to overcome mimicry, and in this I was guided by my readings of Sayyid Hussein Alatas, was that to engage creativity, one had to overcome mimicry, had to overcome the copying, had to overcome the slavish following of hegemony and so forth. And it struck me that the university rankings, I call it a circus, quite frankly. And why don't we call it a circus? The university rankings circus seems to have an overwhelming, how would I say, powerful influence on what universities see as their project, as their mission, as what they aspire to, as what they value. The university rankings system is now a global phenomenon, and in fact, latest count, and I'm probably wrong here, at least 23 nations have different rankings systems. New ranking systems appear to come up like flowers in a garden, and yet at the same time as saying that, if you take the Malaysian example and the struggle, the political struggle that I'm working for here with USM, the ranking system that seems to have the most influence, that seems to drive the debate, that seems to drive what I refer to as an educational panic, is the Times Higher Education Supplement, the rankings system, in collaboration with Thomson Reuters. And essentially, my argument in this paper boils down to, I hope you can hear me, boils down to the proposition that if we're going to allow the kinds of reforms, the kinds of activities, the kinds of growth that we want in our universities, the kinds of things that you've all talked about quite eloquently, then we have to, I'll put it militantly, we have to break this subservience to this so-called global rankings agenda. Now, when, say for example, even in government, I've read quite a lot, as you can imagine, the government documents on this in Malaysia, and I've read a bit in other national cultures. When people talk about well, we must, get the university into the top 200 or by the top 100. It's usually, you always think, well, which ranking system are you talking about? And actually, it's usually the Times ranking system. Now, my argument is that the reason for that is not arbitrary or accidental, or it is to do with the overwhelming power of the neoliberal and Eurocentric imaginary and the way that that is structuring what is considered to have status and what is considered to have reputation and so forth and so on. So I argue, and as I say, I won't go through the paper in great detail, I essentially argue that this imaginary, if you will, is at core a key component of the homogenisation, the drive for mimicry, the drive to make everything the same. And I argue that essentially, unless we can break that or break away from it or critique it or somehow engage it, the overwhelming force that this kind of ideology has on our managers, on our university leaders, on our governments, means that the pressure coming from that direction against the kinds of things that we're talking about will be quite overwhelming. Can I give you perhaps an example from my current work of where this has come up, both on a kind of ironic example. I'm involved also in work in Sumatra, in Penang, with universities, and we have a research institute that we've set up to enable collaboration between my university and the universities in Penang. And the aim is, the official ideology, if you will, is capacity building and so forth and so on. And I've drawn on Amartya Sen in giving talks in Sumatra, linking what we do to all of this, and written in the New Straits Times on this as well. Yet, so that's the tick side, if you will. That's the tick side. Yet, the aim of it is, one of the aims, and this comes from top down, is that an outcome has to be publication in an international journal, okay? So it's for a point system in an international journal for recognised points in the KPIs and so forth and so on. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with publishing in international journals. Don't misunderstand me on this. But it's very clear that the entire outcome is not the entire outcome, that's unfair, but part of the major outcome is publication in that top journal. So there's this whole sense that success is to be ranked according to so-called international journals, and that thus your university, if you know, the whole idea would be if you continue to move in this direction, then the university will go up the ranking scales and so forth. And I've been pushing for saying, well, what about, more local, regional conferences, start working with, with where you are, start connecting to the context, all of these sorts of things. So what I'm saying is that essentially, to cut a long story short, I'm arguing that the evaluating what we do at universities is important, but rankings, as they are currently constituted, and here I'm talking about the hegemonic rankings, as they're currently constituted, are not just dysfunctional to the kinds of aims and objectives of what a university should be doing, or certainly the kinds of aims that USM and many of yourselves, I think, are aiming for. They actively get in the way of it. They actively negate it, and they misdirect what we do. Let me give you another example of the culture that is produced through this, and then I'll wrap up. Some people have said to me, and I enjoy the debate, that the rankings produce a sense of competition, which then drives performance and holds institutions accountable. You know, that kind of argument. And I usually quote Paul Krugman to them on competition and so forth and so on. But I think that I can give an example of where rankings and the whole tangible performance culture, which is the drill down through our institutions of this, can lead to quite negative outcomes. Take, for example, when you have performance indicators of publications or attendance at public lectures, okay? You get a performance indicator for it. So what happens? People, you know what they do? Not some people. They go to the public lecture, they sign their name in keeping with the rankings, in keeping with the indicator, and then they go. So it produces internal to the institution a kind of, how would I say, trickery, dishonesty, and so forth and so on. Now, many people have criticised, in fact, the way the statistics are gathered within institutions for the rankings. That people argue that the pressure of trying to compete is leading to people fudging things and distorting things and all of this kind of argument. So not only are the rankings destructive of creativity, as I've argued in my paper using Samir Amin and Said Hussein Alatas, but they're also dysfunctional even in their own terms, because they lead to radical dysfunctions within the institutions. So my final point is essentially this, that a necessary, though not sufficient, issue that we need to address in relationship to advancing the creativity and empowerment and growth of knowledge is to address and to break this mimicry, this neoliberal globalized mimicry that manifests within rankings and has a massive effect on university administrators, university leaders, and trickles down to have a staggering effect on academics. Let me leave you with one final, another story from my work. Before I was coming here, I bumped into a professor, and I am not one, in the corridor. And she said, so what are you doing now, Jim? You seem to be furiously writing, but no one knows what you're doing all of this. And I said, well, I'm going to a conference on decolonising the university, and I'm going to argue against rankings and this whole culture of... And she said, yes, I agree, but what can you do? Yeah? What can you do? She said, what can you do? That's the system, that's the way we have to do things. And I said, we can do stuff. We can change things. We can argue for change. We can engage, and we can challenge this. It's not just what can you do. And so I think maybe on those last words, my response to my colleague, a good friend, was to say, we can do stuff. Right? I'm going to a place where there's a lot of people who agree that we can do stuff. And I think that it's important, and I think it's a structural issue that informs a lot of the particular issues that are raised here at this conference. Thank you for your time, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. I think the main message that was put across is that the so-called global ranking has stifled rather than helped the development of the culture of learning and creativity within universities. And unless this problem is addressed in its total context, we are going to have universities turning into circuses. The third speaker needs no introduction. Claude has been with the multi-university project right from the beginning. He is the coordinator of this project in Goa, and he is going to talk on alternatives to current, in bracket, ancient university pedagogy. Please, Claude.
Despite my own prohibitions, I was supposed to have a slide put up, but nobody's around. Where's the slide guy? Oh, it's already come. That's good. There's a very super efficient technical team here, so I'm totally overawed by them. But the reason I've put up that slide is to show how far back this system of ours goes. And you can see the guy at the back there who has gone to sleep. So it's correct up to the last detail. And this is university teaching from 1350. I don't think there's been any change, and that's why in the title I've been rather mischievous and put in alternatives to current, in brackets, ancient university pedagogy. And I'm trying to look at things a little bit from the point of view of the student now, rather than from the administrators and the vice chancellors and the professors and so on. And I think for most young people who are idealistic, who want to do something, who go to university, they face probably the most hostile learning environment in the world. I think one of the jobs of university administrators and professors and lecturers is to put as many obstacles to learning as far as possible. And the obstacles are all different types. The primary one is compulsory attendance. I think if you removed compulsory attendance from university, you would know how many people really want to listen to you or want to take up. If you want a ranking system, and do it for Harvard first, because according to all the reports, documented reports on Harvard, one of their worst departments is their undergraduate department. They don't do any undergraduate teaching at all. As a matter of fact, many universities do far better undergraduate teaching than Harvard. And that would be a good way to bring Harvard down at least 300 points on the ranking system. But they don't do that. What I'm trying to say is that when students come to a university, and at least they're hoping that university and college is not going to be like the 10 years of imprisonment that they faced in school, where they had to sit on wooden benches for nearly 5 to 6 hours. And these are children whose natural instinct and endowed by nature to actually move around, play games, climb trees, and you take them and put them in this monkey box and make them sit there for 10 years. And after 10 years, they think that they are going to go into a great new world where they will be free, they will be able to wear their own clothes, they won't have to wear a uniform. And where do they end up? In further benches, tied down for another 4 years. If they're doing a PhD for, I think, another 8 or 10 years. And I think only a fool would go through such a system. And all those guys who normally, say that this is insane and who get out of the system, they call them dropouts, but actually politically astute guys who are really walkouts. Anybody who had got some sense in his head would have walked out of university long time back. Children can't do it because they are totally dependent on their parents, and their parents will beat the hell out of them if they don't go to school. But to find grown-up people sitting for several hours, listening to the same guy for sometimes 2 to 3 years, repeating the same stuff which has gone on for the last 30 to 40 years, not unchanged at all, it beats me. I mean, I don't consider university people in that sense as, you can walk out in the streets and in Bombay or in Goa or any other place, and every person is interesting except a university guy. I went once, I used to go to Goa University to give these lectures to students. And the lectures that the students shut me up saying that you want to talk about other things. We are not interested in listening to what you've got to say. You please tell us only and speak only to the syllabus. And after that I stopped going. I said this is not a place for normal human beings to be. And it's because we are in this world, we move along, as I said, incestuous sort of relationship. And we are with professors in the staff room, or we are, in these dominant relationships with students. And people treat us well because we go to university and we look very polished and things like that. We have begun to feel that we are very important people. But in terms of the contribution to society, as I said, Professor Shadrach was saying yesterday, our contribution is not just zero, it's negative. It's negative. We're teaching people the wrong things. We're teaching them the wrong way. And we're giving them all the wrong messages. We're telling them that if you want to do some learning, you've got to go to this great institution, and most of us get frightened to even enter there because so much of money has been spent on these buildings and making them look avant-garde and the latest in terms of the conceptions of these lurid architects. And sometimes in some universities you don't know how to enter and how to get out because the rooms are all designed in such funny ways and such passages and so on. You come to Goa University, you'll get stuck in there, you won't get out for 3 days. You need expert guidance. I'm talking about this environment, and how do you expect that learning could take place in this environment? And I think professors and the university lecturers know that no learning can take place in such environments. So they've reduced it. They themselves have reduced it. They said, we'll reduce it to very simple jobs. Read textbooks. And why do read textbooks? Because we're not paid enough money, so we can write those textbooks and make some little extra money. And you read those textbooks. Don't go to the library. You read the textbook. We will examine you on whether you are able to regurgitate the textbook. And whole university education all over the world has been reduced to that. I mean, you reduce learning, higher learning is reduced to very low down textbooks. Textbooks which are so badly written, because most university lecturers are not writers. They don't have a flair for writing. If they had flair for writing, they'd probably be writing novels and making some money there. They're very poor teachers. Nobody teaches, the entire lecturing community in India is not taught how to present and make a point. They've gone through school, they've gone to college, then they get a degree, then they get recruited, and they're automatically standing in front of 50, 60 people and then telling them the truth. It's impossible. It's never going to happen. So what I've tried to do, at least in this paper, you won't find any quotations. I've got a history of revolting against quotations. I found most of my university colleagues spend half their time quoting other people, and we never get to hear what they have to say. The fundamental point is, why have we brought learning into this institution and kept it there, and now build all these sort of barriers to it so that people just can't get in? And why do we feel that higher learning is going to get, and it's only that higher learning which is of use to human beings? We know it's not of no use to human beings. In the traditional system, the traditional Indian system, you had to go to gurus. And you went to guru, sometimes it would be, I think it was a period of 12 years. Every 12 years, you had to stay with him. And the most interesting thing about these bloody gurus is they never told you anything. That's the point. If you're going to consider what somebody else is telling you as the truth, then it's no longer your truth. It's his truth, which you have made your own. So we have endless stories in Indian culture where no guru ever tells you what exactly the whole business of life is about. He'll tell you, go and stay in a forest for 12 years, and you come back. And then you come back, he finds out from the way you are coming back, from the way you walk, whether you have found out anything. And then if he's convinced that you have not found out anything, he goes and tells you, go back again for another 12 years. Nowadays, we get a diploma in 3 months. But that sort of higher learning was completely free, and it was based on the person finding out for himself what the whole business of life was about, what meaning is about, what his place in the universe is about, what his role in society is about. And nobody was given a degree for it in any sense of the term, but it was relatively free. And I still can't figure out why in this whole society, for example, Malaysia, India, whatever, where we say people are yearning for learning, why we don't keep the doors of the universities free? Why do you charge fees? Why do you charge fees? Why do you have registration fees? Why do you have all this nonsense? If learning was always free, and if we have free societies and we are all brothers and sisters, and we are part of one great family, why did we have this institution where from the beginning we start putting in all these blocks, and the first block being the block of cash? You don't have cash, sorry. You're not entitled for learning. Forget about higher learning. You're not entitled to learn. And we say we are modern societies. We have got unimaginable science, technology available to everybody in the world. Everything is available to everybody in the world. But you first pay the cash. Once you pay the cash, then it's over. Why can't we have a good university, maybe Pan-African university, where grandfathers, grandmothers, children, everybody is allowed to come and interact? If a professor can't talk to a grandmother and can't talk to a 6-year-old child, what sort of a professor is this? What does he profess? In my scheme of things, if I were a vice-chancellor, I think they would have to remove most of these institutions from the planet and literally, open the doors. And why should we enable Vinay Lal to just yak to only 45 students in Delhi because they have to pay a cash to somebody so that they can pay him a salary? The entire city of Delhi can give him 1 rupee each, and he would be a millionaire, and he can talk to all of us. What's the use of his entire learning if it's stuck to 1,000 copies of a book and 40 students a year, and he's got only 40 years of life, and at the rate he's eating kebabs, he's going to go down faster. So I'm not going to be a vice-chancellor because nobody's ever going to appoint me as a vice-chancellor. But I thought that existing universities can do a lot of things. I've tried to propose them, give them up in my presentation, which is a very chaotic presentation because I don't follow any academic rules, and I'm not interested in following any academic rules. I've got no ranking to go through, and nobody's going to bother about my career. But one of the things that I could always, with Manish, I mean, he's a pal of mine, that's why I dragged him up here, that we always say, why do you take students out from a learning environment and put them in a non-learning environment? Something that's I've never been able to understand. You take a child who is in a natural environment, who's learning continuously, and you say, now you stop that learning and we start this type of learning. And what's this type of learning? This type of learning is sit on a box and now we tell you what learning is. And they don't understand at all because they're not even mentally equipped to go through all that process. They're still wanting to do lots of other things. And then you say, no, now the learning, we decide what learning is, and it's going to be every 30 minutes. And every 30 minutes, this child is learning history and enjoying the history, and then is going deeper and deeper into it and wants another 2 to 3 hours and say, no, now it's enough, stop that, start this new book, civics book. And after 20 to 30 minutes of civics book, they say, stop that learning, start this. So I can't understand how you can do this learning, start, stop, start, stop, start, stop. I mean, how do you get anybody to learn anything like this? The whole university system is based on this. Now, we don't think that the university should be such that in one day, for example, one whole week is devoted only to history. So that everybody can discuss history, can discuss African history, what happened, whether we were part of Arabia or not, what happened in India, what did the Buddha teach, and how long did he take his time to get his enlightenment, and all the questions that we wanted to ask. We have no concept as such. We think that everything has to be given in small doses, and those doses are sufficient, and of course in the end it never works. Why don't we have a whole year devoted to whatever we wanted to teach? And those who want to come, those who don't want, go somewhere else. I don't understand the compulsion. Does anybody learn anything under compulsion? Does anybody anywhere learn anything under compulsion? You learn 45 minutes of history, 45 minutes of this medieval period, 45 minutes of ancient period. You start from ancient, go to medieval, come back to this, come to modern. What the hell goes on in your head after all this? And then you say, you replicate all this. This is for jugglers and magicians. How do you replicate all the gobbledygook that's been given to a student over 1 year by 15 different professors on 15 different subjects, and all truncated like this? I mean, who created this epistemology? Europeans. We didn't have this epistemology. We didn't have this pedagogy of doing. We are very relaxed. That's why in this conference you see it. Farooq, contrad it with his experience in Japan. We are not in Japan. We intentionally create environments in which people learn, can become friends, can exchange. We don't expect many of the important things to happen during this seminar conference. We are expecting them when you're sitting in the cafe opposite. That's where things would happen, not necessarily in a conference like this. And we just want you, that's what we are so happy about, that you're such wonderful guys. Yesterday there were guys who had come from Iran, who were speaking in Farsi, and yet you people, and some of them were Muslims, some of you are not Muslims, but yet you had that kindness and compassion to sit and listen and said, this is guy, he's coming from a totally different place, but they've given me the space to sit and listen to him. And if I don't want to listen to him, I can go and jump in a swimming pool or go to the sea, but it's not going to add to my biodata. But it's a space, and this is the space in which learning has always taken place all over in traditional societies, in all our societies. It's not at all reflected in any of our institutions, because we bother about these rankings and about these professors and lecturers and timings and periods, semesters and courses and all that sort of thing. Why? Because we think we can measure. These things are measurable. Is learning measurable? Is understanding measurable? How do you measure on an indicator 1 to 10 that somebody has understood that 2 and 2 is equal to 4? Either he's understood it is 0 or 100. There's no question of is 43% or 77%. But we measure learning on a scale. Not the stupidity of the European Enlightenment. Because in the earlier learning you couldn't measure it. Either you were enlightened or you were not. And the people in society knew who were the enlightened guys, so they would go to them, the ayatollahs, the gurus, they would sit with them. And there was no question of time, no question of money. And you sat and chatted and worked, and you served the guru, he served you, he by his actions, as Parsa said yesterday, you learn from his actions. You don't have to tell somebody you do this, these are the values of the society. The values are actually encapsulated in the way the Imam Ali would say, you are my guest, I may be the caliph, but you are my guest and I'm going to give you water today to wash your hands. And he said, no, it can't be done. But he said, no, he persuades them. He doesn't force them, he persuades them. And then they say, yes, we have learned something. You can give us the water to wash our hands, even though you are the caliph, you are the God of the universe. So let's try, there's been some sort of complaint here in this audience that we are, not being very practical. We are not, coming down to brass tacks, to very specific things that we can do. And now we can get into that. But sometimes I think we forget the basics entirely. We forget where we are. We forget that we are not in the business, but we have been given this role by society, or maybe some of us have appropriated this role for ourselves, of being guides to youngsters, being guides, of being counselors, of being colleagues, of being partners. We end up by being lecturers. I think we should ban the word lecturers. Nobody is in a position to lecture anybody. Lecturers, professors, the terminology should be banned. And we should have, that it changes the concept. When you say, this is Professor so-and-so, you say, oh, this man. And some of them are very careful. They say, no, I'm a professor. I'm a professor doctor. I'm a professor doctor. So, this is to intimidate you. This is not to, this is conveyance, this is to intimidate somebody to you. But if you say, I'm Claude Alvarez, then it's okay. It's a different thing. He's not putting a title there in front because he's not insecure anymore. He's telling you, I am an individual, whoever you are, let's have a conversation. And you come and tell him that I don't know what to do with my life. And you can tell him that I don't know what to do with your life either, because it's your life. And you can sit together and discuss through the medium of sociology or history or philosophy or so many other things. You can discuss, you can treat them as colleagues. Any professor who treats their students as as something below him, he is not fit to be a professor at all. Because what does a professor know? His universe is limited to what he has learned. The whole world is huge. The cosmos is even more huge. And the millions of people who could have taught him something if he only opened himself to them, he's deprived himself of that learning. And all the time, if you could teach our professors and give them orientation courses, like they do in the Islamic School of Art, that would be such a wonderful thing, because you would find everybody learning and they would be happy, they'll be smiling. Not today. Students don't want to be in classroom because it's hell, it's a burden. Why should learning be a burden? Learning is supposed to bring everything, the best of a person. He's discovering, he's enjoying the business of discovery. And it's a burden. Why did you make it a burden? And if you have made it a burden, then you are responsible, not he. He has come to you. He has paid bloody money to you. And you, having taken it, then send him away, dissatisfied, disgruntled, and also in the end, because he has not deigned to study what you wanted him to, you have dubbed him a failure. Nothing happens to you, because you've got tenure. You're going to get your cash, whatever happens at the end of the month. But if you failed 40 people in life, you've ruined 40 lives. You've given them a communication that they were not fit. And they would have been fit. They may not have been fit for the rubbish that you taught them, but they would probably be fit for a million other things. I'm sorry for going on like this, because I just want to keep many of you awake so that you don't go to sleep, because it's lunchtime coming around the corner. But there are very few things, and the message is coming from the chairman. Be careful that you've got to get out of this talking business, and Manish is waiting to talk to you. I just want to introduce this is not self-promotion, but this is the type of social science that I've been doing in the last couple of years. I don't write books anymore. I write source books. This one, for example, is a source book on Goa's environment. It's called Fish Curry Rice. And many of the bookshops put it in a recipe section. So, and then there's to curse me for it. So I finally ended up putting two fish making recipes, fish curry recipes, in the book, so that they don't feel cheated. But the rest of the book is basically a very diverse book on all the sources on Goa's environment. Interviews, books, NGOs, all sorts of things, and very important physical information, environmental information. So it's now used as a de facto text in most of the education institutions in Goa, schools, colleges, and anybody who wants to write anything on the environment comes to do it. But without being at university and without being a teacher in the school, I control all the thinking on environment in the state. But the other one is the organic farming source book. And these books are collaborative books. This book, for example, promotes people who decided to give up modern agriculture and are now doing organic or natural agriculture. And it's a whole lot of people who had never been to university, who had never been consulted about what we did. So I went around the country. It's very interesting, just like a learner, taped them, interviewed them, put them down, and made them all big heroes. And today they are consultants, they are being talked about. We had a conference last year in Bangalore with the entire faculty, 28 faculty, for the conference for all organic farmers. And there was a rival conference going on the other side of campus, which was all PowerPoint presentations by agricultural scientists, and that was organized by the university. And they found out in the end that they closed that conference because all the participants were to be found in our conference. Now, this is what happens when you go to people of knowledge, real people of knowledge, and give them an opportunity. And there are millions of them all over the world. And this is what I do in real life. I just go around, talk to people, put them together, and then push them up and say, this is what these guys are saying. And they're using their minds. An organic farmer, for example, uses his mind because nobody is there to teach him how to do farming, because the real pundits, the people who teach, are agricultural scientists who only know chemicals and pesticides. So they've got to learn everything. So they are the best learners and the best teachers. And they've just been ignored by the university system. I try to bring them back. So if many of you could get into this act, it would be very nice, because these books sell very well. They make me some money compared to academic books, which don't sell at all. And now they don't sell at all because people just scan them and put them up on the net. Thank you very much for listening to me, and let's have some more conversations later on.
Thank you, Claude. I think you have lived up to your reputation. It's not just talk, 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 but you also, as they say, walk the talk. You raise many provocative questions. Some would describe your approach as rather subversive, but these questions need to be reflected and responded to. But I thought perhaps the most significant question that was raised, and I'm going to paraphrase, was this. The university is supposed to be a very exciting place, but why is it not so? Let's see if Manish, with his experiment of a new university, is on a new or right track. Please, Manish.
Thank you. I'd like to start by thanking all the organizers for bringing together all this wonderful group of friends and colleagues from all over the world. It's really been very helpful for my own decolonization process to continue by listening to everyone. Even my head is still spinning from Professor Raju's trying to wrap my head around the calculus discussions yesterday. But let me just start by saying that I've spent the last 13 years trying to walk out and decolonize myself and heal myself from the West. I grew up in the US, and I walked out of UNESCO and out of an academic career, once at Harvard. I've been trying to spend the last 13 years trying to understand the damage that was done to me through that entire process and to heal myself from that. I identified with Professor Augustine's presentation, but I have to admit that my own efforts of decolonization have had very little to do with academic books or reading at all. And in fact, it's been my own so-called illiterate grandmother in the village and also my 9-year-old unschooled daughter who have really contributed to my own understanding of what it means to live authentically and with humility in this world. I'd like to just add one thing to what Professor Augustine had said was this fourth stage of mine, which has been what I call radical reimagination of what's possible in the world. It's not just an accommodation, but a reimagination of something. And this is what the Swaraj University experiment is an outgrowth of that. Just let me preface saying that what I'm about to share with you about Swaraj University is still very much a work under progress, and it will probably be under progress and under construction for its entire existence. I can only hope so, because that would ensure that it remains a dynamic entity in the world. And what I think is that we are trying to shape this process through kind of a participatory dialogue with the learners, which Claude was bringing in their perspectives, with a whole range of very innovative and inspiring ustads, that we call them, from around the country and around the world, and with a deep dialogue with communities that people are coming from and that they're related to. So the form and shape is changing as we go along. And I think we have a deep commitment in that process to somehow regenerate the deep wisdom in our communities and to maybe forge out a new kind of politics and a new kind of economics in the world today that many people have referred to the need for. So let me just say that I think it's, when I say reimagining, the time has come for us to reimagine the university. I think some people had talked about a lot of the discourse from the 60s and 70s around decolonization And you can even go back to the work of Gandhi and Hind Swaraj, which actually starts the decolonization agenda, lays it out as very a very clear and necessary process that's needed for real freedom to take place. So when I say reimagining the university, I think that in addition to the content which has been discussed so far, we need to start to rethink some of the underlying structures, the processes, the assumptions, the images, the spaces, and even the economics of how the university is structured and has been created. All of these things have sometimes been referred to as what's called the hidden curriculum. And today I would argue that the hidden curriculum is actually has a far more deeper and profound impact on the mind and how people engage and relate into the world than actually the official textual-based curriculum. So unless we engage with this hidden curriculum, I think even if by changing the content, it may not actually really help us decolonize ourselves fully. So much has been said already to critique the university from its how it serves to further enslave us into the global economy, how it is disconnected from and often undermines the everyday life, the idiom, the soul, the needs of local communities all over the world. I would only like to add a small observation to that, is that how it is producing a parasitic class of people, and this is related to the hidden curriculum, that if I look around universities all over the world, we only find people who study. Their only work in the world is to study. They have no responsibility for their food, their waste, their shit, their energy, their water, their clothing. They have no interest to know how it's being created, where is it coming from, where is it going. And I think that we can say in India, I've seen so many campuses all over which have gobbled up so much land, sitting on, even hundreds of acres of land, and not even 1 kilogram of food is being produced on those beautiful pieces of land. And so much water to just maintain these lawns, to try to pretend that our universities are as good as Cambridge and Harvard, that we have beautiful lawns manicured. But I think if we think about very simple, as our universities able to sustain themselves, our students being encouraged to actually grow some of the food that they want to eat, or are we actually creating this new class and perpetuating this class of parasites and parasitic living? I think that what happens is that students get disconnected from the intelligence of physical labor and from the wisdom of nature in this process. And they start to internalize a lot of bizarre notions, such as it's their birthright to live by exploiting others. They have the right to make money by any means possible. And that being educated means that they should leave their local communities and go to metro cities or ultimately to Europe or the West. So this is, I think, something we have to think about, how this actually, the parasitic mindset is embodied in the way we are living and how we have conceived what it means to study. And in relation to this, I would just like to say that I think one question for us to really put in front of this entire group is, what is our image of an intellectual today? Are we going to maintain the same caricatured, stereotyped image of the intellectual that has been brought in by the Western, Eurocentric universities, of the professors? Or can we generate our own image of what I call Desi intellectuals? And I'm fortunate to sit next to one of my role models as a Desi intellectual, Claude here. And I think this is something that I think we need to seriously engage with, is how do we see what it means to be an intellectual today in our communities. So let me just say something briefly about this experiment of Swaraj University. It's inspired by Gandhi's book, Hind Swaraj. Swaraj literally means rule over the self, self-awareness, self-mastery, or in the words of Professor Samdong Rinpoche, a move from being self-centered to a centering of the self. It's a critique of modern civilization and its narrative of progress and the industrial military development paradigm. And it's a call to engage in a deeper dialogue about the meaning of freedom and bringing our lives back into greater harmony, compassion, and truth. So Swaraj University is committed to exploring what Swaraj can mean today in our lives. And so we call we don't call the students students, or we don't call them learners. We call them Kojis. So Kojis comes from the word Koj, which means to seek, to search. So we say that the fundamental starting point of all of our lives is we're seekers. We're searching for meaning. We're searching for, these questions of who am I, or what is my purpose in this world, or what is my, what can I do to serve my communities? What is a good life for me? So these kinds of questions we would like to open up to everyone to explore as part of the program. And few key features when I'm saying reimagining. So one part is what we call it is focus is on self-designed learning, in the sense that every Koji is responsible for co-creating their 2-year program. Each program is individually designed according to their dreams, their questions, the needs what they perceive the needs to be in their communities, and what they can see as new, what we call green livelihood opportunities. Because for many youth, as Yusuf and Claude have referred to, this idea of what is my livelihood? How am I going to do something beyond serving? I understand that the global economy is totally messed up and screwing my people. Now what can I do differently? I think that's a profound and fundamental question we need to open up and engage with if we want to create a different kind of politics and economy. So each of them, we have a group of guides who works with them to help them understand themselves better, to reflect on some of the choices that they want to make, to identify, help them identify potential ustads. We call our mentors and ustads, and they're based all over the country. So far we have 50 plus. Some of them are sitting on this panel also. And the idea is that people can choose who they want to go with. They can go and spend a certain amount of time living with them, working with them. And they can also decide what they want to read. Oftentimes the ustads recommend to them that if you're working with me, maybe this is a book you would like to read. This is something I've found very meaningful, inspiring. They also go out and research and decide what other things they would like to read. They bring those readings back and share it with the rest of their cohort of peers. The second thing that I would say is that the process we talk about is that it's a phrase that we're trying to really embody, is that the world is our classroom. So the disconnect I found when I was thinking of my own experiences, that this artificial disconnect between curricular and extracurricular. All the fun, exciting learning things happen in this domain of extracurricular, actually. And so I think we need to re-examine how these categories have been made. And also that the idea that learning and knowing cannot be totally divorced from place and context. Nor can learning and knowing be divorced from engagement with our head, our hearts, and our hands, something that Gandhi ji had referred to. So this process of every place and being invested in place and actually linking one's own knowing and learning processes to place-based situations is very important. We have a physical campus, but we encourage the majority of time that people be out and exploring things in their own communities, around Udaipur, around the country. And the campus only serves as a site for a kind of reflection and some sharing and some cross-fertilization of ideas and experiences that people gather while they're designing their own program. We had one Koji who took this idea of the world as their classroom very seriously, and he decided to go on this Kisan Swaraj Yatra, which is a farmer's yatra to explore the idea of farmer suicides, to understand organic food movements, and to understand what is happening with GM seeds, genetically modified seeds, and to promote local seed banks. So he was the only youth in that entire yatra to participate for 2 months. He visited 16 states. He went around, met farmers all over the country. So he was telling me that there were youth from other colleges coming, but they would stay 1 day or 2 days and then leave. So he invested himself to actually understand and engage with this process in a much more deeper way than as Claude was talking about. The third thing I would say is reimagining, is which also Claude referred to, which we have done, is that we need to get out of this cult of the PhDs as being the only intellectuals or the teachers for us. And so we have our ustads are from all walks of life. They're very high integrity people. They're in their own ways exploring what Swaraj can actually mean in their communities. We call them thinker-doers. Many of them are local artisans, farmers, traditional healers. So they have oftentimes no formal school degree even, and they've also been recognized. And we don't try to call them into a university classroom setting. We actually encourage the Kojis to go and actually live with them. Because again, decontextualizing so many of these alternative or traditional or indigenous knowledge systems are very much connected to place and to context. And as soon as you rip off people and say, okay, now and you're trying to make him then or her to become like a university professor, and then the whole, boredom and pain burden that Claude was referring to starts again. And the idea of this is there's another principle called, which we try to keep it alive, which is called mutuality. The agreement, there's no guru or ustad that can be forced on somebody. So there's a mutual agreement between the learner and the ustad, and that both can decide how long they want to be in relationship for, and whether the learner chooses whether they want to be, and there's also a choice from the ustad's point of view. So I think that's very important to maintain. Without that choice, then it's a different kind of imposition and mind control process that starts to happen. And I think the relationships that are built in this process are actually at the heart of the entire university. Couple of brief more things is that there's quite a bit of emphasis on co-learning between the Kojis. So as they're off learning different things, they come back and they host seminars, presentations, workshops for each other. So that helps to deepen their own learning, as well as to encourage cross-fertilization of ideas and thinking, so that people don't end up reproducing kind of silo kinds of thinkings you find in mainstream academia. There's no certification or degree required to join Swaraj University. So I think this is very critical, because if we are understanding the entire how the entire education system has been colonized, then why do we want to still demand some certification for them for entrance into our processes? So we're very open to people joining without any qualification. We have it quite interesting, some people who have not even completed class 5 who have joined, and we also have people who have completed BAs from Delhi University and from IDS in UK who have also decided to join. So it's a very rich kind of interaction of diversity of people involved in it. We decided to keep the program in Hindi. It's hosted in Hindi. There's been a lot of interest from people abroad actually in joining. So we have asked them to learn Hindi, and then will be open to joining. We have one woman from the US who has spent the last 6 months learning Hindi to actually join now the program in next month, starting next month. So the last couple of things I would like to say is that the entire experiment is set up in the spirit of gift culture. So one of the things that we're trying to do is decommodified knowledge. The modern education system has turned knowledge into a scarce commodity, which is only for a few accessible, where actually learning is happening everywhere and is accessible to all. So the idea of gift culture has several dimensions. One is the relationship with all of the ustads. So none of them have demanded any kind of payment for hosting a learner, which is, I think, in tune with the traditional spirit of learning, which was actually, and often some of them will pay the learner after the process has been completed, because they valued the relationship and the contribution of the learner to their work. And also, in terms of we don't take any government funding, nor do we take any foreign donor agency funding. So the entire enterprise is supported by contributions from different friends, and also some contributions from the learners. It's a kind of flexible. There's no charge for the learning process. So that's been one of the entire strong principles on which the entire experiment is built. We ask people to contribute for the cost of their food, stay, travel, and that again is a sliding scale to whatever they can do. And we ask them, if you can't do something now, then you can operate by the principle of pay it forward. So after you've finished and after you've gone on, you can sponsor somebody else in your community to come and learn in this process. So, and the last thing I'll just say about that is that this is, Swaraj University doesn't give out any degrees or certificates. It is 100% undeemed and unrecognized by University Grants Commission. We actually are printing T-shirts which advertise that fact. And the reason is that we don't, one is that we don't think that those people who are sitting there are actually have the capacity to actually understand what this experiment is all about, and why these kinds of people's universities need to be generated. Also, that we don't think that the degree is necessary. Actually, the person who's leaving the program, their quality of confidence, their skill level, their knowledge level, their commitment to learning, their commitment to being in deep relationship is something that we think is quite visible already after 1 year, that people are really asking us for people to join them from Swaraj University. What we're doing actually is trying to do a few different things also to help them feel more secure. One is that they develop their own portfolio and well documented what are the experiences, what are the projects they've been developing over 2 years, who are the people they've been with. This issue of a lot of the mentors are writing letters of recommendations which go into the portfolio, which hold a lot of weight in India because a lot of the networks are connected, and a lot of the people like Claude are well known and their opinions are valued in that. And we also had run so the second thing is that we are encouraging them to develop over 2 years a livelihood practice. So at the end of 2 years, they will have been able to have started their own organization or their own enterprise or their own kind of vehicle for some kind of earning where they can sustain their activities. So that's a second thing. And the third thing, there are some students who have said that we'd like to have more work experience. So we ran a campaign several years ago called Healing Ourselves from the Diploma Disease. And we've been organizing, we've organized over 100 organizations who have agreed to either totally remove the requirement for degrees and diplomas from their hiring processes, or to give the space for people to submit portfolios of their experience into that process. So we're in the process of building up. Our goal is in the next 3 years to build up at least 1,000 organizations around the country who would be willing to hire people who come out of this kind of process. Or we have a larger network which Claude and I are involved in called the Walkouts Network. So anybody can actually access this list of organizations and apply to those places without any degrees. So, and I'll just close by mentioning that the use of the word university in India by non-UGC approved groups is illegal. And so after much debate, we decided to use the word university because we want to open up the debate around what is a university, who controls a university, who decides what a university should entail. And so it's a form of satyagraha on our part. We eventually think that there will be some clampdown on the Swaraj University, and then we'll be calling up all of you guys for entering into this debate in India and in the media with us. So I think I'm up on time, huh? Okay, so I'll end it there.
Thank you very much. I'm sure you'll agree with me that Manish's presentation complements what Claude was trying to argue. May I invite Shyam Menon, the Vice Chancellor of Ambedkar University, to offer his comments, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Vice Chancellor is a bad word, so I'm disowning it. After Claude's brilliant and comprehensive impeachment of university, the answer truly is what Manish presented. But till such a time that Manish's model proliferates, I think we need to work with mainstream universities. So some of us are, in fact, undertaking this challenge of working with an imperfect system, imperfectly. I'm reminded of Gramsci's remark about Trotsky when he said, tragic is the category which characterizes someone who lives in a structure and tries to transform it. So probably that would be the category that can characterize some of us. But we always go with St. Augustine's prayer, asking for wisdom to discriminate between things which we can do and things which we can't do, and try to use whatever little elbow space that we have completely and totally to make some distinct impact. But it's a struggle. It's a struggle, and that's precisely what I'm trying to present in front of you. Mine is a practitioner's perspective. I'm not a scholar in this area. I will attempt to share with you the predicament and dilemmas that an infant mainstream university faces on issues related to decolonizing. Decolonizing was not topmost on our agenda, frankly, when we started the university. Marrying equity and quality was. That was our concern. So it's therefore interesting for me to assess now, after 3 years of starting this university, where we stand on decolonizing. The emerging common sense about higher education among opinion makers in India today is that public systems are on the decline. Public education, just like public health, public transport, public distribution system, they are obsolete and inefficient. That the state should focus on supporting only a select set of higher education institutions, ostensibly catering to excellence and innovation, particularly in science, technology, IT, and business. Creating greater inclusiveness in market-oriented education should be left to ostensibly not for profit, but actually for-profit institutions. That's not the state's business. That the bulk of the public institutions of higher education, particularly those in the social science and humanities, should at best be kept under palliative care. That issues related to access and equity can be divorced from excellence and quality. So there are some institutions which are supposed to take care of equity and social justice, and some others for excellence and quality. This is by and large the common sense which even some of our top leaders, including the Minister of Human Resource Development today, I think, share. This is the context in which we were asked in 2008 by a provincial government to put together a university dedicated to social sciences and humanities, and we were taken by surprise. The university is named after Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, who, born into a marginalized, untouchable community, struggled and made his way in the early part of the 20th century to the central stage of public life in India through attaining, quote unquote, excellence in higher education in the strictest colonial sense. A double PhD from Columbia and one from Columbia and another from the London School of Economics. The government's expectations from us were not very high. We were a social science university after all, so they didn't have much expectation from us. And we were an Ambedkar university. We were not a Jawaharlal Nehru university. So the expectation again was not very high. So it was important for us to demonstrate, therefore, that even public systems can be efficient, that the social sciences and humanities are linked with concerns of development and social change in which we can define our own parameters of excellence, that it is possible to marry equity and quality in higher education, that it is possible to create not just a new institution, but perhaps a new institutional culture. We decided to focus to begin with on, one, interdisciplinary areas such as development studies and practice, business, public policy and social entrepreneurship, human ecology, psychosocial clinical studies, law, governance and citizenship, culture and creative expressions, and areas such as these, which usually do not find place in mainstream social science universities. Second, creating capacities in the interface of the state and the civil society, because we thought that most of the progressive, and civil society in India is a strange animal today, because there are so many civil societies. But this was before this present phenomenon started. 3 years ago, we thought that that's the interface area where we must focus on, as opposed to market. Addressing not merely market demand, but social needs, for which market demand may have to be mobilized. So we differentiated between what a polytechnic should do and what a university should do. While polytechnic can probably cater to market demand, the university needs to mobilize demand where none exists, where they think that there is a social need. Our credo is engaged scholarship. We decided after much debate to make English the medium of instruction, but not to make prior competence in English as a criterion of undergraduate admission. We offer several levels of courses in English language at the first 2 semesters and graduation to ensure that all students attain an acceptable level of proficiency in the language. This has been very difficult, indefensible politically, because all of us at some point used to believe the importance of having vernacular higher education system, but then we very consciously decided to make this an English university, because if it's for the marginalized should have access to what is considered to be the best and marketable, especially when we send our children to English schools. We decided to create a differential fee structure where the full fee for those who can afford it is slightly higher than many other publicly funded universities, while those who can't afford receive a large number of fee waivers through bursaries, which we ensure that nobody who is selected is denied a chance to study with us merely because they can't afford it. This we actually write as a credo on all our brochures. Our instructional design involves a teacher-pupil ratio of 1:12, class size of about 35 to 40. I'm sorry, Claude will be disappointed. A predominance of tutorial-based teaching and a large portfolio of student work, largely written and field-based work, which is considered for a process of continuous assessment. At least 25% of our coursework, all our coursework, including literature, involves hands-on, field-based activities. We strive to be a non-hierarchical, collegial community. Not easy, but we are trying. We have a system of concurrent appointment of faculty where a faculty member is appointed to more than one school or program. This is to avoid disciplinary entrenchment. We are trying to establish a strong mentorship and student support system. One of our flagship programs is an MA in psychosocial clinical studies, about which Ashish knows a lot, which is vertically linked with an MPhil in psychotherapy and clinical thinking, where the emphasis is on supervised clinical work and an intense mentoring system. While the theoretical framework remains admittedly largely Eurocentric, there is an attempt to engage with it critically and create alternative theoretical paradigms based on local realities, including indigenous healing practices. We have created a center for community knowledge with the purpose of documenting and digitally archiving indigenous, largely local traditions related to areas of knowledge such as metallurgy, healing practices, practices associated with childbirth, navigation, conflict resolution, history through people's memory, and so on. we plan to link this documentation with our courses and draw faculty resources where possible from the community. I mean, almost trying to mimic Swaraj. There is a consultative process at present going on for creating a center for engaged spiritualities and peace building. This is with a view to bringing back to the university the plurality India presents in terms of traditions of spirituality, and also to weave into the institutional functioning an element of open-mindedness, collective reflection, and sharing. We are finalizing at present an MPhil program in development practice, which will be largely based on field immersion and won't be classroom-based, and where part of the faculty will be drawn from social activists and functionaries of field-based NGOs. The idea is to break away from the high church character of university knowledge and to emphasize on an alternative epistemology based on praxis. There is one issue, however, on which we lose a brownie point for decolonizing. Our initial faculty of about 70 includes several PhDs from universities from the North Atlantic. This was not by design. This was largely because of the recession and meltdown and the resultant reverse diaspora of expatriate Indian doctorates, particularly in the social sciences and humanities, which we witnessed in the past few years. We have not, however, found it difficult to enthuse these young colonized minds to participate in envisioning the new university. I will end with a few lines from Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Buddhist teacher. Once there is seeing, there must be acting. We must be aware of the real problems of the world. Then, with mindfulness, we will know what to do and what not to do to be of help. I vow to listen to all others and to allow myself to be touched by the joy and pain of life. I vow to invite all hungry spirits into the circle of practice and to raise the mind of compassion as my offering of the supreme meal. I vow to commit my energy and my love for the healing of myself, the earth, humanity, and all creations. Thank you.
May I invite questions or comments from the floor? Identify yourself. Make your comments very short because we don't have much time.
I'm Sultan Ismail from India. My question to Claude, can we perfect the imperfect system? We have a system with us, it's functioning, and we all know that it is imperfect. What you say is a total change from what exists to something different. And as long as there is an unholy marriage between degree and the market, how best can we professors at this point of time create a roadmap by which we can change and bring in a change in our modalities of teaching? The second question for Mr. Campbell, Dr. Campbell. Dr. Campbell, all these evaluations and assessments of ranking are based on certain characters which have been designed, certain principles which have been designed with some educational institutions in mind, based on publications, for example, research publications. Now, these research publications are evaluated by professors. Who ranks these professors as competent to rank a publication? Thank you very much, please.
دو تا سوال من داشتم. یکی از جناب آقای دکتر کمبل که ایشون طرح رتبه بندی نئولیبرالیستی رو نفی کرد ولی پیشنهادی رو مطرح نکرد که چی میخواد با توجه به واقعیتایی که وجود داره در جامعه طرح پیشنهادی ایشون چیه؟
My first question is addressed to Professor Campbell, and the question is that he denied this ranking system, this neoliberal system, ranking system. But what is your proposal for a different system according to the needs and the context of our societies and culture?
یه سوال دیگه هم داشتم از جناب آقای دکتر کلاد که من احساس کردم از بحث استعمار زدایی ایشون داره یک بحث دانش زدایی رو نتیجه میگیره. به نظرم استعمار زدایی بحث مهمی است که این نشست در همین زمینه است، ولی نباید ازش دانش زدایی رو نتیجه بگیریم. استفاده از آموزش عمومی کشاورزا قطعا لازم است، اما نباید از آموزش دانشگاهی کشاورزی که به هر حال به یه دستاوردهای مثبتی هم رسیدن غفلت کنیم. یا مثلا دانش پزشکی سنتی با پزشکی جدید به نظرم باید هماهنگ بشه. الان دانش پزشکی جدید بیماری ها رو درمان میکنه که دانش پزشکی سنتی توان اون درمان رو نداره. به هر حال از دانش جدید به طور کلی نباید ما صرف نظر کنیم.
And the second question is for Claude, and he says that I kind of felt that this decolonization process that you're talking about at some points may lead to like the eradication of knowledge as a whole. Like, and what he means is that like although we can pay attention to the like public, or as he says, public knowledge of the like the traditional agriculture in India, but at the same time we also should pay attention to the like the university knowledge of agriculture, because at some points they also have had some achievements. Or in the case of medicine, that although we have the traditional medicine, but the like the modern medicine, they've been also able to like cure some diseases which we couldn't cure in the traditional like medicine. So this is the question, then how we can make sure that there is a balance between these two processes.
Okay, thank you. Professor Farid.
I would like to issue a couple of challenges to the panel, the panelists. First of all, with regard to the idea of the university, I think I'm, as usual, sympathetic to many things that are being said, to what Claude said, but I think we have to realize that different civilizations have different traditions in education, and the idea of a university, of a degree, of even payment is also part of the Islamic tradition. So it's not something that we can just set aside. Now, it suggests to me in this discussion on the university that Eurocentrism is not just about distortions. It's also about historical amnesia. The university is a very good example. It has multicultural origins. It started in the idea of a degree granting institution started in the Muslim world, and the idea of the degree, the idea of the granting of permission. This was called ijaza, permission, and it was translated in the Latin European world as licence, licencia, licence in French, and different languages of Europe. Now the funny thing is, in some countries, like even in Iran, for example, they use the word licence, which is a translation, which is a French term, which they adopted, forgetting that licence itself is a translation of ijaza. So there's some historical amnesia there. We think we are adopting a European university model when the history of the university is a lot more complex. Of course, the Europeans built their universities based on the Muslim models and further developed it. And there's also the contribution of the Chinese. The mass examination system is a contribution of the Chinese to the university. So the university is truly a modern institution. So the trick now is to continue. We don't want to go back to the medieval university, but we want to continue, developing the university in ways that are perhaps more relevant to the kinds of problems we are discussing. So I think that, for me, is the challenge. I just want to, and I'd like you to respond to that. I just want to say one last thing. We are having this conference in Malaysia, and very little has been said about the pedagogical, educational problems relating to Eurocentrism in Malaysia. And it's so wonderful that we have people from from so many parts of the world here, especially from the south. And it's important to note that in Malaysian academia, particularly in the arts and social sciences, we have never seriously taken the literature of Asia, of Africa, the literature of Africa, of Iran, of India, the Philippines, not to mention Latin America,
the critical literature that sensitizes us to the problems of Eurocentrism, as well as other, epistemological issues in the social sciences. So Malaysians generally have not been passionate about doing a kind of subaltern studies in Malaysian history, or adopting the critical perspectives developed in Indian anthropology, or in other, or certain critical perspectives developed in Middle Eastern studies to the Malaysian academia. So I hope that's something that this kind of meetings will really benefit our academia. I'm sorry, really last point. Unfortunately, I have to leave after lunch, so I won't have a chance to say this. It's something about Malaysia, but it applies to other countries too. Local languages are not just media of instruction, of communication. If we only regard language as a medium of instruction, then we're going to lose out on the possibility of new concepts. In Malay, for example, we have migration studies. In Malaysia, we have migration studies. Now, the term migration is often translated, if not migrasi, which is a Malayized English term, but there is a term merantau, which is used in Malay, but it's often used to translate migration. And when people translate migration as merantau, they often don't realize that in the Malay term merantau, there is embedded a certain meaning of migration, a certain type of migration. That merantau is not simply a translation of the word migration, but it refers to a certain understanding of certain types of movements within a rantau or region, which is different from the social scientific concept of migration. So language has to be taken seriously because it is possibly the origin of new concepts. And I think universities need to concentrate on the issue of concepts and ideas and not just structures. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to join my voice in thanking the presenters for a job well done. But my question is intended for Professor Manish. And that is in the area of his concept of from self-centered to centering of the self. He said that they move beyond self-centeredness to centering of the self. And then he said there is a process of co-learning between the coaches, encouraging cross-fertilization of ideas or competence. I wanted to hear more or an expansion of the idea of centering of the self and co-learning between the coaches. If the coaches are participatory and mutually interacting, trying to learn from each other, is the self-centered or is the self-participatory? I don't know whether you get the point I'm making. What I'm trying to say, you see, the concept of the self is a dominant concept in psychology. And somebody like Carl Rogers has spent a lot of writings clarifying the meaning and the importance of the self. And he deviates, he challenges the focus on self-centeredness. And that is why I'm very happy hearing centering of the self. But what's the difference between centering of the self and not being self-centered? And also, how does it relate to the idea that the members are co-participatory or do learn from each other in sharing ideas? If they learn from each other, are their selves still centered? Centering of the self. In what self? Thank you.
Okay. Last question. Yes, please.
Over the last 3 days, I've been wondering whether we aren't attempting to reinvent the wheel. About a century ago, Rabindranath Tagore of India put together a university which was not called a university. He called it Vishwa Bharati. And Vishwa refers to the world as a whole, or possibly even the universe. And Bharati refers to Bharat or India. And by linking the universe to India and placing it in a completely vernacular context and a vernacular dialogue, he sparked at the start of the last century what in effect was an Asian Renaissance. At a time when there was no Department of Korean Studies, Koreans were invited to Vishwabharati. When there were few, if any, Chinese studies departments, Chinese scholars were invited there. When Persian or Arabic was to be considered, he got scholars from there to come to Vishwabharati. And from what was supposed to be a unique experiment in undertaking higher education and higher scholarship in the vernacular, as it were, we've now found Vishwabharati deteriorating from a first-class university in the sense of a place which is universal into becoming a second-class provincial university. Is there a lesson to be learnt in this? Are we going to create new categories, or are we trying to get back to a universal category of saying that the Homo sapien is an undivided entity, and that what we are searching for is all of humanity, all of humankind, within a system of knowledge that embraces the entire human experience? Or are we going to make the colonial mistake of dividing up human knowledge, human experience, civilization into what Tagore called narrow domestic walls? Are we going to say that we are going to lead the mind forward to an ever-widening world, or are we going to go back into our little compartments? Thank you.
Campbell, could you please respond to your specific comment on you?
Who ranks the rankers? Who guards the guardians? Nobody. The ranking system, the people who make these decisions, essentially it's up to us in a way. We are ranking them by criticising them and so forth. But at the moment, a lot of the take for example the Times Higher Education Supplement system. A lot of that is accepted as if it's objective fact, as if it's just accepted. It comes out like a football table, and part of the problem is that most of us. I mean, one of the reasons for the popularity of this is that it presents very, very complicated data and very, very complicated issues in a very simplistic and easy to read form. Okay, so politicians make. I mean, if you read the media, politicians make. Points out of it, journalists attack universities on the basis of it, vice chancellors lose jobs on the back of it. So basically, if you look at, say for example, the Times Higher Education Supplement, before the QS Quadriceli Simmons used to run the methodology for them, then they had a falling out with Times, and then Times brought in Thomson Reuters. Suddenly, the deputy editor, the editor of Times, was going around the world saying that there were severe methodological problems with the previous regime, right? So, of course, the conclusion you can draw is that, well, all of those previous ranking tables are a complete nonsense because of the suddenly a brawl, a business fight, right? A business fight erupts between QS and Times. Okay? And let's not forget, rankings are a business. Let's not forget that there's a political economy underneath this. In terms of the question of what is the alternative, okay, so fair enough, Jim, we get the point, but what's the alternative? Well, there are several ways to go. some people are essentially, you know, what is it, a pox on all their houses. They want to withdraw from rankings altogether because they are very critical of the numeric audit culture that dominates through it. And I think we've heard reference to this by other speakers. Other people say, no, the truth is that we're going to have rankings. So the issue is to design particular ranking systems that are more in keeping with measuring, that the measurements are more publicly verifiable, that the methodological problems are addressed, that context is taken into account, and so forth. Take, for example, the alternative rankings system that USM is, for example, involved in, which involves a consortium, if you will, of universities throughout Asia, and is currently, I think, is in the process of perhaps will start to be tested in Malaysia. So there are, in other words, there are other examples. And there are examples of people saying, well, we will design ranking systems that, for example, take into account, specifically look at universities' involvement in social empowerment and all of these sorts of things. So my second answer is there are people working on alternatives. The problem they face in reality when they start looking at it is how do you define something as different? How do you create something that does measure things more that we want measured? And also, how do you ensure that there's transparency? Because one of the big problems with the current ranking systems is this problem of transparency. You know, who's making the decisions and so forth. But the short answer to it is there are people working on this. USM is specifically working on this, and there are other organisations as well working on similar things.
Okay. I think you will agree with me that what this session has done is to have raised more questions than perhaps provided answers. In fact, the conference itself has thus far also raised so many unanswered questions. But that was intended and deliberate, and I think we are not going to go a second beyond this, but we will break for lunch. But before that, please join me in showing our appreciation to all the speakers and the commentators.